Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Many of you reached out after Dr. Teshnas' episode a few weeks back and were sharing with me how excited you've been to discover her, attend her weekly forgiveness ceremonies, and begin to reprogram your subconscious minds. And even though we covered a lot of ground in that episode, there were so many more aspects of her work that I had questions about. And as such, I wanted to have her back on to discuss the concept of vanishing twins and some telltale signs that you may have had one, what she's seen with regards to working with generational trauma, what she's seen in working with conditions such as psychosis and schizophrenia, and much, much more. So strap yourselves in for another deep dive into the realm of subconscious reprogramming and creating the necessary space within us to live our best lives, as I welcome the one, the only, Dr. Teshna back onto the show. Dr. Teshna, I am so excited to be back with you for part 2. Your first part came out a few weeks back, and I know that we wanted to talk about some other subjects, right? Vanishing twins that we kind of like teased on the first episode, and a lot of other things as well, right? And we're going to see where this episode takes us, but I'm super excited to be back with you. You're back in Ecuador now, out of New York. How's the hot, nice weather treating you?
Really well, really well. Actually, where we are, it's like 5,000 feet in altitude. So it's like perfect weather all year round. It's like from like 75 to 85, 90% of the time. So it's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's just perfect.
Oh my goodness. That is music to my ears. And I'm super excited, like I said, to dive back in with you. And, what's been going on in the last couple of weeks for you? How you been, and has anything happened? Has anything occurred that has been kind of wild for you, or have things kind of been chill and calm since we last spoke?
Well, I've been doing a lot of my forgiveness calls every week. And actually, some of your listeners have joined and they seem to really enjoy it. So that's really cool. Yes. And also I taught my 1D MTT immersion as well last weekend. So that was great. And then more and more people are being exposed to this technique and loving it. So it's really a lot of fun.
Oh, that is amazing. And guys, if you haven't listened to part 1 of Dr. Teshna's episode, she has amazing forgiveness ceremonies she does on Sundays. She has these one-day trainings she does completely for free. And then she has like her facilitation training as well, where you can actually like really learn the full scope of this stuff. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure to go grab the links from there. We'll put them in this episode too, but come check them out. I know that the last couple of months have been kind of crazy for me, but once I get back from these couple of trips I'm going on, life opens up a lot for me, and I am excited to get back on those calls because they really are magical. And I've had some opportunity to work with you one-on-one as well. And yeah, the stuff we worked on never came back. It was removed out of my subconscious forever. So I can't thank you enough for that.
You're so welcome. Yeah. I feel like I cracked the code, right? So it's like a brain hack to be able to find out what's in the subconscious and then use the technique to release it so that it's not there anymore. So
definitely
you can move on and put something else in there that you want instead, so that you can start, manifesting what you want and removing the blocks that are preventing you from getting where you want to be.
Yeah, 100%. It's like I see a lot of people, including myself, make that mistake when they first start getting into whatever you want to call it, manifestation, subconscious work, that kind of whole realm, is they keep trying to add things in. But before you add things in, you got to subtract and create space, because if you don't have any space, how are you going to fit anything in there? So I think it's kind of like a mindset shift, or at least it was for me when I first learned it, because my whole life I had learned that if something is going wrong, I must need to add something in, right? If I'm in a bad mood, let me get something sweet to, make myself feel better, and of course I moved through that in my early 20s. I don't eat sweet stuff anymore, but again, it just continued to play out in my life. Oh, I must need a new supplement. Oh, I must need more acupuncture or more chiropractic care, which again, none of that is bad, but at what point did I actually start to think like, hey, you know what? Like maybe I should start subtracting cars from this traffic jam in my mind rather than just keeping adding new ones in. It's really funny to think about it.
It's true. It's true. And that's why when I teach the work, like I always teach people first to find out what is there and then get rid of the things they don't want in there. And then there's room to put the one you want in there.
Yes, 100%.
Otherwise, you're just fighting your own subconscious constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's no fun at all. Like at the end of the day, for me, I choose to work with people that can help me get to what I want to and what I desire, like what goal I have, in a quicker, more effective and efficient way. And, I mentioned this in the first episode, but just in case anyone's tuning into this one that hasn't listened to the first one yet, I've tried a lot of different modalities. I've tried like in this realm, like brain integration therapy, which is cool, super fun. Emotion code and body code, again, super fun. But your modality is extremely unique. And for everyone that hadn't listened to that one, Teshna, you've been in this since the beginning. You were at the first tapping conference ever, and you've done a lot since that time to really craft this modality into something that's not only powerful, but super simple. And it's funny because the guy I was just podcasting with before this, we were talking about that whole idea of doing less to actually get more done, and actually relaxing more and trying less. And so when I saw your modality and experienced it, I was like, of course, this is the way, because it's easy. It's not rocket science. Of course, it is some type of science, but it's not rocket science, And that's what I love most about your modality, because as someone who, like I said before, has added a lot of things in and had a story running in my life for a long time that things had to be hard. They had to be some kind of calculus equation of work. It was so relaxing and relieving to realize that the best things in life I've experienced, including your modality, with regards to physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, have been the simplest things. So it's just so cool.
That's great. Yes.
Yeah.
And, like you said, like back in the 1983, when I first started chiropractic college, that's where I was exposed to muscle testing for the very first time. And that was brand new back then. And so nobody knew anything about muscle testing. And we weren't just testing one muscle, we're testing all the muscles of the body. And if they weren't connected properly, then we'd reconnect them. And like you said, in 84 is when I was at a conference where Dr. Callahan presented his idea of tapping meridian points to release emotions. And because he was part of the applied kinesiology gang, and he applied it to his field. And so I started using these principles back then. And then in 87 is when I met Dr. Scott Walker, who's the inventor of neuroemotional technique, which is amazing technique. And I became certified in it and everything. I took, like 15 different seminars, because every time I take it, I get more out of it, and I'm clearing more things and everything. And then what I decided to do, I wanted to be able to teach my patients how to do this for themselves. So I took all these elements and I made them really much more simple, so that you didn't need to have a doctor degree to take this. You could just be a regular person, a mom or a dad or a child or anybody, a self-development enthusiast that's looking for a tool to help get rid of stress, or get rid of limiting beliefs, removing blocks easily and quickly using meridian therapy and tapping. So I teach both in my trainings.
I love that. I just did acupuncture today, and it's so funny, like talking about the meridians, because I've actually heard, I forget who it was recently, talking about breaking down like Jesus's supernatural powers. And I don't say supernatural in quotations like it's not supernatural, but it is, I guess, supernatural, but it is still natural, right? Like working with meridians, working through Reiki and all these different energy systems. And it's just so cool to be able to really decouple this. And it's still magical, it's still mystical, but there's actually a process you can follow for it that you can replicate at home with yourself, with your loved ones, etc., to allow them to take the weight off they're carrying and allow them to create that space like we were talking about before. And I know in the last episode, we teased the idea of vanishing twins. And I would love to get into this with you, because I know you've explained this to me before about a year and a half, 2 years ago, which, it's funny for everyone listening. I might have mentioned this in the first one, but Teshna and I did an episode that was supposed to be on Highly Optimized. Like it had to have been a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And we have no idea what happened. I mean, it might have been a vanishing twin. It just completely vanished, right? So speaking of vanishing, give us the details on what the whole vanishing twin thing is, and also what your specific story is and how you figured out how it applied to your life. Because I know you have a specific story of your own instance of this happening in your life.
Yes, exactly. So basically, this vanishing twin idea started with Scott Walker, because when we do NET, we find whatever the emotion is and where it's stored in the body. And then we also index for time to find out when did it start. So when he did that, it went back to in utero at 3 months in utero for this particular person he was working with. And so he was testing, okay, something to do with mom? No. Something to do with dad? No. Something to do with a sibling? Yes. So then he named the sibling that were already born, right? And it was no, no, no. So he's like, it says sibling, there's got to be. So then he thought, a vanishing twin, and it went down. So he was like, oh my God, a vanishing twin. So then after, and he cleared whatever was going on for that person, it made a huge difference. So then he shared that discovery with all of us NET practitioner. And that was a long time ago, at least 25 years ago, maybe longer. And so back then, nobody knew anything about vanishing twin syndrome. But then what happened is maybe 15, 20 years ago, the medical profession decided they were going to do ultrasounds on every pregnant woman, whether they needed it or not. It's just another revenue stream. But anyway, because before that, they would only do ultrasound on women who had bleeding or pain or leaking amniotic fluid, or if they were above 40 and they were pregnant, they want to make sure it wasn't a Down syndrome and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't everybody. It was just, far and few betweens. But 15 years ago, then when they changed that procedure, that protocol for pregnant women, they started doing it on every pregnant woman. And by doing that, they discovered that 1 out of 8 women that they did the ultrasound on had 2 babies in there. But at some point in the pregnancy, it died, it got reabsorbed, and now it's gone. So at the other end, there's only 1 being born. Once they start discovering that, then they actually have an insurance code for that. It's like, I don't remember what it is, like 10 point, whatever it is. And it's for the vanishing twin syndrome. So it actually is legit. If you don't believe me, go look at it as ICD-10 code, or maybe it's 11 now, whichever one it is. But they actually have that, because now if they take an ultrasound on someone and they see 2, and then oftentimes they'll do 2 or 3 ultrasounds on the pregnant women during the pregnancy. So if they do another ultrasound, let's say on the 5th month or the 6th month, and now there's only 1. So they have a diagnosis code for that visit, vanishing twin syndrome, because maybe the mother, had some spotting or cramping, or maybe she fell down and she was worried. And, so then they do another ultrasound and they find that there's only 1.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Wow. That is wild. It's so interesting too, because what are the chances someone would figure that out, right? Like, especially without this modality and things like that, like it's almost supernatural, to use that term again, that someone was able to figure this out, right? And be able to actually understand like, oh, that obviously has an impact on the other child that was in there. And if I remember correctly, you had an instance where you had a vanishing twin. Is that accurate?
Yes. So when some of the NET practitioners were working on me, it came up that I actually had 2 vanishing twins. So my mother was super fertile. So she had 3 of us in there. And it's like, and then one of them died and then the other one died. And so I ended up just being the only one there. Right. So, and interestingly enough, it tends to run in the family, so to speak. So my sister had 1, my brother had 1, so, and I'm pretty sure either my mom or dad had 1. I'm not sure which one, because I never tested them for it, but I wouldn't be surprised, because that's what happened. Right. And it's just like in the animal kingdom, right? A lot of, for example, dogs and cats, oftentimes they have 2, 3, 4, or even 17, in some breeds of dogs. Right. So it's not really completely impossible to think that humans also could have something similar. That's why sometimes there are twins that are actually being born, right? So, or triplets even, right? And so it is possible. Everybody knows that. But what people didn't know is that sometimes they are in there at first and then they die because they're not viable, because there's not enough food for two of them, because there's not enough room for two of them, because maybe the umbilical cord is too small so they don't get enough nutrients. There's all kinds of things. Or there's a defect, like maybe they have a heart hole, or they have something going on that doesn't allow them to survive.
That's wild. I mean, it's just so interesting too, because, at the end of the day, like my neighbors, when I was growing up, they're triplets. And it was so funny. Like I couldn't even imagine having 3 kids at once. Like I don't have any kids, but I couldn't imagine having 3 at once. That sounds insane. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious for you, like, if someone listening is like, I wonder if I had one of those, are there any certain ways that someone could tell without getting tested, or is it something you need to get tested to kind of figure out? Like, is it that subtle that you would need to get tested? Because I imagine for you, like, you study this stuff, you had no idea until you got tested. So I'm just curious, like, if someone could figure that out, or maybe if you found common symptoms of someone that maybe had a vanishing twin, what those would look like. I'm not sure if there are any, but I'm just curious.
Yes. Actually, that's one of the things that I developed as a technique to find out if people had a vanishing twin. And so I literally will test people with a statement of, I can let go of the belief that love and life mean being abandoned by my twin. And if it's the first time I ever worked on that person, if they go weak on that, that means their emotional reality is that they had a twin. And then the other thing that happened is I worked with so many vanishing twin syndrome survivors, that's what I call us, that I started noticing a pattern. Like every single person that I worked on had an abandonment issue. Like we all feel like the worst thing in the world would be to be abandoned, because it would replay that first wound of being abandoned by our twin, right? And then not only that, we tend to reproduce this abandonment over and over. So for me, when I was just 1.5 years old, my mom and dad had to go give birth to my sister, and they left me for like a whole month. And I felt abandoned by both of them because my sister was premature, so they had to stay there. She was in the incubator and all this stuff. But I'm 1.5 years old. Nobody bothered to explain to me what was going on, right? So I felt abandoned by both of them. So then 6 months later, after she was born, my dad had a nervous breakdown, and he was hospitalized in a mental institution. So now I felt abandoned by my dad again. So then my mother had to go back to work because, he wasn't working because he was sick. And so she had to go back to work. So she put us in foster homes so that, because she couldn't take care of us and work. So she had to find a family to take care of us. So she did. And so I felt abandoned by my mom again, right? And it's like so many abandonments like that until I figured this out, and then I changed that belief. I changed that pattern. And ever since then, I haven't been abandoned. So it's kind of nice.
Wow. That's so wild. Yeah, it's so interesting too, because I know a lot of my personal clients that have gone through certain abandonment wounds. Rachel has an abandonment wound too. Maybe for all I know, I have one. I've never had like a fear of it by chance. Like I've always naturally gravitated. Like I always say, if I have one real gift in this planet, it's connecting with people. I can make friends with anyone. I can see anyone. I can make them feel seen. So I'm curious because, my mom was 38 when she had me, so a little bit on the older side, and she had always wanted a child. She thought she was kind of not going to have a child at that point. And she met my dad and they had me. But it's just very interesting because, I can think of many of my clients that just struggle with this abandonment wound. And, I've had many different, limiting beliefs and unconscious stories, et cetera, that I've moved through, but I've never really had the abandonment come up before. So it's so interesting, because, from one person to the next, you can have these wildly different experiences. Like, do you notice that between vanishing twins, or people that have had a vanishing twin, are there any other commonalities between them besides like an abandonment wound? Like, are there any other commonalities, or or can they be vastly different?
No, there's a lot of commonalities. Like I wrote a book, Fit for Love. You can get it on my website, drteshna.com. And in that book, I have a whole section on the vanishing twin and the 17 different categories that I noticed. It was like a pattern. Like so many of my vanishing twin syndrome survivors had the same beliefs. Like, for example, having to be right. It's kind of like this, I call them the survivors, so because we felt like the only thing that got us to live while the twin didn't was we were right. We won, right? We won, so we got to live, and the twin lost. And so then people tend to create these win-lose situation in their lives. Like I had a patient and she came to me and she was like, my husband is such a loser. And I was like, really? So I tested her on, I can let go of the belief that love and life means being with a loser. And sure enough, it showed up. She believed that. And then it went all the way back to the twin that she believed that she had to be with a loser or else she would die.
Wow.
So that's another one, right? It's like the survival, having to be right. And then there's so many of them. I have them all in there. I'm just going to look at my thing. So, another very common one is the savior. So I was in that category. So most people who are in the healing arts, maybe not everybody, but a lot of us go into the healing arts because we want to save people, because we weren't able to save our twin. And now we don't want anybody else to die on our watch. So we're doing everything we can to save people. But the problem is, it's a compulsion. And so you can burn out. Like people will just like give their shirt, like they'll work 24/7 and then they burn out because it's imbalanced, because they're so afraid that if they don't try to save them, they're going to die. And they don't want that. Do you see? Even if they're not even close to dying, they still feel like they have to save them from whatever is going on just to make sure. Right. And I've noticed that in a lot of health practitioners. And so I had to clear that in myself so that I wouldn't be, so you can say no, because otherwise when you're like the savior like that, you can't say no. Somebody asks you, oh, can you work on me this at this time? And you, okay. You always make time, right? Instead of making sure you have time for yourself, and then you can also take care of others, but not at the expense of your own health or your own sanity, right? So that's another one. Another one is they can't lose weight. So some of the people who can't lose weight, it's because they saw their twin lose weight because they were being reabsorbed, right? And until they vanished. So some of the vanishing twin syndrome survivors believe that if they start losing weight, they won't be able to stop it. And they will just keep going until they vanish. So I have to clear that in people, and then they can finally lose the weight that they actually want to lose, right? So that's another.
Oh my goodness. It's funny. I definitely identify with the savior one for sure. I've had a lot of challenges throughout my life of saying no, especially when I got into business, because, the kind of story that I've told myself is that I watched my parents go through challenges with their health, right? Like they're amazing people. My dad was amazing. My mom still is amazing. They gave me the perfect childhood. Like I always want people to know I'm never dissing my parents, but they went through their lives saying yes a lot, especially my dad, but my mom too. They would stay later at work than they wanted to, and they would grow resentment. But, of course they know too, like it was their fault for saying yes to it, but it almost feels like a compulsion, And so I've noticed a lot of that in myself. I was just talking about this on an episode I did earlier today where, one of the things that I've really learned over this year is that if someone reaches out to me on Instagram, I take a lot of pride, if you will, in making sure I serve them, right? Making sure I get back to them. But the challenge is that as my whole brand has started to grow, it can be sometimes 3 hours a day that I spend getting back to social media, text messages, emails, etc. And that's at the end of my day. Usually I'll get started with that at 7 p.m. So some days I'm still getting back to people until 10. I start at 8 in the morning. So I'm pulling 12 to 14 hour days trying to get everyone served. And around the first of the year this year, there was a real big awareness for me of just I do not want my life to look like this anymore, because it's now taking time away from my clients, my clients that are paying me to make sure I can support them. It's taking time away from my family. And most importantly for me, it's taking time away from me to be able to explore the other millions of hobbies and interests I have. And so there's been a big, taking back of my energy and saying, hey, I'm sorry, if you want to get to me, get into the course, right? Listen to the podcast, etc. I have plenty of free stuff out there, but I can't support everyone. I can't unless you decide to hop into one of my things. And then, yes, I got your back, but I can't support everyone. And it happened very quickly where I just started to realize like, yeah, I don't want to run that pattern anymore. And I would like to run a pattern where I'm able to say, hey, I love everyone. I'm always down to support, but this is the container I have to support people. If you need support, we've kept it very affordable. Hop in there. But that's the most I can do. I can't answer all your questions anymore just because it's getting too intense, And so very interesting you bring that up. I definitely resonate with that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's another category that I find a lot in Vanishing Twin Syndrome survivors is people who feel depressed, but they don't know why. Like there's no reason. If you look at their life, they had normal childhood. They weren't never abused. They were fine, but they feel depressed and they don't know why. And so oftentimes it goes back to having lost the vanishing twin. So they're still depressed about it, that they lost their twin and they'll never be able to be with them again. Right. And then it's almost like at the same time, it's like they feel unworthy of being happy and healthy and wealthy because their twin didn't get a life even. So who are they to deserve all of this? Well, that's a huge deal. Sense. I've helped so many people get over depression just from doing that. Letting go that belief that they're unable and willing and unworthy to allow themselves to be happy and healthy and wealthy because their twin died.
Wow. That's so incredible too, because, every time I talk to you, Teshna, it really makes it like blatantly aware that, like for me, I started getting into limiting beliefs and unconscious stories and things like that about, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And, it's funny that, when you get into it, people are like, just go on YouTube and find positive affirmations and repeat them to yourself. And again, like, that's great. Like saying positive things to yourself is great. But it just goes to show that it's almost like if you have a virus on your computer, it doesn't matter how much RAM you put into the computer. If you hardwire your internet in instead of going on wireless to make it go faster, you're still running a virus program, a malware program. And until you remove that, a lot of bandwidth is going to be getting taken up by that. So you can repeat the same things to yourself over and over again. But if at your core, you don't believe it, every time you say it, there's going to be a part of you that's just like bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. It's so interesting. I love that about your work is that it really decouples and gives at least me a lot of hope, and I imagine many other people too, that it doesn't always need to feel like that. It doesn't need to be the grind of like, okay, I need to repeat the same affirmations to myself every day for 3 years. And if I miss a day, then I'm messing up. Like, no, it doesn't need to be that complicated. Life would never be that complicated.
Exactly. And actually in my 3-day training, I teach people how to make affirmation work, right? By testing each of the things you're saying and making sure you're congruent with it. And if you're not, you use the technique to become congruent with it. So then you start resonating at that frequency, whatever it is that you want, and it's much easier to manifest it.
That's super awesome. It makes perfect sense too, because, again, like there are certain things in my life that some of them you helped me with too, and some that I've had help with like emotion code and things like that, where, like it was just like I was trying all that I could, I was putting in all the effort, I was doing my best, but it just felt like I was paddling upstream. And that's typically for me, like what I realized when I'm like, okay, something else is at play here, and again, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And even when you know it, you don't really know it. Right. So like, again, that is the human experience in a nutshell. And so what was so amazing of speaking with you is a lot of times, like I can't identify what limiting belief is coming up or what unconscious story. And that can put a lot of pressure on you, right? When someone's like, well, what do you believe about yourself? What is your story? What is your limiting belief? You're like, I already feel like my head is a traffic jam. And now you're telling me to try to think about what the problem is. Like, I don't know what the problem is. I'm sick of thinking about it. What I love about your modality is that you don't need to do any of that. You don't need to like sit there and try to really think about what the thing is. You just muscle test and you figure out what is the thing that is weighing you down, and it saves so much time. It's so much more efficient, so much more effective. And that's one of the many reasons I'm so grateful to have met you, because it really decoupled so much of that grind culture I had around trying to fix my subconscious overall. Very interesting.
Yes. And of course, in the training I teach, and even in the 1-day MTT immersion, which is free, I teach people how to self-muscle test because I think it's such an amazing tool. I want to teach it to everybody. So it doesn't matter if they can afford anything or not. They're going to learn how to muscle test themselves and how to access their subconscious and how to clear at least okay statements, So because if you test yourself with, I'm okay with money, and you go weak on that, the likelihood of being good with money is pretty small because your subconscious is not agreeing with it. So you need to use the technique, and then you rewire the subconscious so that now when you test yourself, you'll be strong on, I'm okay with money, right? And then, of course, in the 3-day training, I teach about belief system and the love blueprint and money blueprint and career blueprint and health blueprint and all of that. We go into depth into all of that, right? So.
Oh, that's so amazing. And I'm curious for you, like this just popped through for me to ask you, like, we hear a lot about generational trauma and these kind of things. And I know that you work with certain entire families, like Jason's family, right? Like, I'd love if you could kind of just give us like what you've seen, because we hear about these things like generational trauma and just trauma in general and limiting beliefs and stories. And because they're not tangible, like you can't reach out and touch them, I think a lot of people get kind of confused of like, well, what does generational trauma really look like? Or is it even real or things like that? Now, of course, I believe in it, but I'm just curious, like, when you work with entire families, do you see the same things pop up if you haven't corrected it yet? Like say from like father or mother to son or daughter. And then if you fix it in one of them, does it then test positive in the next one? Have you seen those things happen?
Yes, I have. So like basically what I found, and I have a lot of my students are finding the same thing, is that if you clear the parent of the belief, either the mother or the father or both, then it will clear that out of the child as well. And I have one of my members, it was really cool. Her daughter had some issue in swimming class or something. She was really upset. And so when she came home, her mom decided to test her. So she muscle tested her with whatever that belief might have been around it. And sure enough, she went weak on that. And so then the other kids, she has 4 kids. The other kids were all there and they said, hey, test me too. So then she tested all the kids and they all had that same belief. So then the kids said to the mother, Mom, I think you have it too. So then she tested herself and sure enough, she had it too. So then what she did is she cleared herself. And then once she was clear and she was strong on it now, she retested all the 4 kids and all of them were clear now, like immediately. And I think it has to do with the DNA because her DNA is in them. And it's like, it's a frequency. So all of a sudden she changed the frequency of her DNA because that subconscious program was no longer there. And it automatically transferred to the kids. And she noticed another time when she had a fear about something and she cleared that fear. And then after that, she noticed that her kids didn't have the fear either. So it's really amazing, And then, so I used to think that it was just from like the kids up to 16 years old, that it would happen with, because that's what I had observed. Now I have so many students. One of them, she cleared one of her fears. And her daughter, who's 21 or 26, she didn't have that fear anymore after she cleared herself. Wow. So obviously it's expanding. So I don't know where the limit is, but hey, you know how the American Indians say that everything you do will affect 7 generations forward and backward? So I think that's what we're dealing with here. I think, this is still a discovery for me to see how far it goes. I know it works for the person. I know it works for their kids. And now I know it works even for their older kids, right? So that's really pretty cool.
It's amazing, and I really think that in the day and age we're in right now, it's kind of like, if you think about it, like, when we were hunter-gatherers, things like that, it would probably be pretty hard to find the safety to be able to, maybe not. I mean, this is not a long process, but it would have been challenging to do this a lot back then. But these days, most of our basic needs are met. Of course, there's still horrible things happening in the world, of course. But, a lot of us are in a basic level of safety anyway. And so I think that the generation, millennials, Gen Z, whatever you want to call it, even Gen X, et cetera, we're starting to become aware of like, whoa, all right, like, okay, my basic needs are met, but I'm not feeling the best. Like, what's going on here? So we're the first couple of generations that are really starting to get curious about like, what's going on here, and it really actually started with the baby boomers, I would imagine, because even my mom is getting into this stuff now and whatnot, but I'm really like amazed at just how many people are getting into this stuff. And it's amazing that you're able to teach this stuff now, because I just really feel like it is the day and age where we get to now dive into this stuff. And thank goodness, because, we come into this lifetime like you were talking about, carrying so much weight from the last 6 or 7 generations. And a lot of us just like don't know what's going on, right? Why we feel the way we feel, why we feel depressed, anxious, etc. And I think a lot of us normalize just like, well, I guess this is just how I feel. And like I said before, we don't know what we don't know. So how do we know how good we're really supposed to feel? And what I love about your modality is it just keeps getting better and better and better and better. And the ceiling for how good you can feel, how fulfilled you can be, how in love you can be with your partner just continues to get up leveled for me every time I go through one of your modalities. And I just love that so much because for me, I've had this hashtag kind of thing that I've used for years, which is Team No Peak. So they talk about like, people that peaked in high school or things like that. And I'm not judging anyone for that. But, if you're on Team No Peak, then you are always saying like, the best has yet to come. And I love looking at that because even if you're 95 years old, right, and you do this modality, you can feel better than you've ever felt. And so for me, it gives me a lot of inspiration to keep moving forward, that my best years are yet to come, that the happiest I've ever been has yet to be experienced. The most fulfilled I've ever felt is yet to be experienced. I just get to keep getting better, more fulfilled, happier, less anxious, etc. And I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And I'm curious for you, like, when you work with students, like I imagine, obviously you can see these things as they're starting to lift and you're starting to see people really be able to kind of take a lot of weight off. But I'm curious if you've dealt with, I imagine you have dealt with individuals with so much trauma that maybe they're suicidal, things like that. Because I get people hitting me up from the podcast saying like, oh my goodness, all of this sounds so great, but my situation's different. I've always been super depressed, things like that. I'm curious if you could share any stories, of course, with names omitted or whatever, that of people you've worked with that maybe were at that level that kept getting better and better and better, right? Like to show that exactly what I'm saying and articulating, that you can keep getting better and better. There's no ceiling for how good you can feel. Do you have any stories like that come to mind or heart?
Sure. So like I had one of my students that she had been like literally raped. She had been into like slavery. She had been beaten. Her mother rejected her completely as if it was her fault. The first thing, the rape and all that. And so many other traumas, for like many, many years. And she just wasn't able to really recover. And she happened to hear about me and we started working with her and we just cleared one trauma after the other. And we got rid of all her PTSD. And so that now she's actually helping other women recover from the same thing I helped her recover. So it's really cool, right? So it's like she learned the technique and now she can do it, right? And I have another one where this girl was kidnapped and was to be sold, right? And she disappeared for like a whole month and her mother was completely desperate and it was just pretty bad, right? So, and then luckily they were able to find her a month later while they were transporting her to the coast. And they found her and it brought her back, but she was destroyed. I mean, literally she was destroyed. She was having hallucinations, visual and auditory. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She couldn't go to school for sure. She didn't want to leave her home. She was just like a disaster, complete disaster, right? And she was only 14. And so I knew the mother and I heard about the story. So I said, look, come over and I'll work with you. And so first I worked on the mother because of course she had been like super stressed because her only daughter disappeared, right? For a whole month. And she thought she'd never see her again. And so anyways, I worked on her and cleared her stress about it until she felt good. She was okay. She could be okay with all that. And then I worked on the daughter and same thing. I just went little by little, all the different traumas that she felt in that kidnapping thing. And I cleared the whole thing up and they went back home. And the mother called me up and she said, I can't believe what you did, but my daughter is back. She doesn't have the hallucination anymore. She can sleep. She's got her appetite back. She's actually dancing in the house and singing, and she wants to go back to school. I mean, it's like, it's so powerful. You can help save a life. I mean, she could have been like a disaster forever. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm reaching out to different organizations from that are being trafficked, saving trafficked girls and boys and whatever. And I'm actually inviting them to come and take my training for free so that they can learn the technique and help the people that they rescued much, much quicker. So I started with an organization in India, and then I'm going to be doing one in Indonesia as well. So that's my contribution to the world, right? And then also I'm willing to my goal is I want first them to take it online so they have the whole thing. And then I would like to go in person and make sure they get it, and then actually worked on these people, and really coach them so that they can do it. So that's one of the things that I have on my hopper.
Teshna, that is beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. What an amazing gift to give the world. And, one of the things that popped through as you were talking too is I work in the realm of plant medicine, as you know, and, there's a big conversation around psychosis, schizophrenia, these kind of things, especially when it comes to cannabis. I think that, that medicine gets kind of like, the blame for a lot of psychosis and schizophrenia. Now, I already know based on my buddy Len May's research that if someone has a predisposition and a mutation in their AKT1 gene, they can be predisposed to psychosis and or schizophrenia. But the challenge is that cannabis could be the straw that breaks that camel's back, but it could also be a traffic accident. It could be a loud bang. It could be a lot of things. But I'm curious if you've ever worked with people with psychosis, schizophrenia, et cetera, because a lot of these people, they reach out to me and they're not looking to connect with plant medicines or things like that, but they're just really scared this is going to be the way things always are. Have you seen any results in those realms? Because I get asked a lot about that.
Right. I would say that's not my expertise to work with psychosis and that type of thing. If they're able to think, right, then I can work with them. I can help them get their stress level down for sure.
Definitely.
And that might help because, as you know, when you're having a psychosis or you're paranoid about everything, then you're full of cortisol. And when your cortisol level is high, it shuts down the frontal cortex and you can't think. So at least what I can do with people like that, if they're able to, be functional enough for me to do this with them, then is to lower their level of stress about whatever it is that's stressing them the most, right? And if there's several things that I could work on that, so that now their cortisol level is lower and their frontal cortex can work and they can think. Right? But that's definitely not one of my areas of expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, because a lot of the people I speak to, like, they're not typically they're not in a psychotic episode right now or something like that, but maybe they've been there in the past. And personally, I think that, I'm thinking about one friend of mine who her whole life she was in and out of mental hospitals and things like that. People were telling her she was, in psychosis, schizophrenia, et cetera. And I know these things really exist, et cetera. And there's varying levels of it, of course. But, I think that in the modern day right now, I think we're figuring out that a lot of the people labeled as, neurodivergent or autistic or psychotic or schizophrenic or any of these kind of things, they actually have a lot of gifts. And in tribal societies, they might be the shaman, they might be like the seer, or any of those kind of roles too. It's just interesting, to see how many things are shifting so quickly in the world today. And I was labeled anxious when I was 16. I was told that I had generalized anxiety disorder, not that I was experiencing it, but that I had it. And I think that created a story around like what people with anxiety are capable of doing, right? Like I realized at that point, like, oh, I can't speak on stage. I have anxiety. I couldn't, do a podcast. I have anxiety. And I was fortunate enough through plant medicines to be able to work through that. But I also know that working through things like that with plant medicines is a very slippery slope, because a lot of times what can happen is if you don't know really what you're messing with, you can actually end up becoming more anxious, more depressed, et cetera. And this is no diss on the medicine. It's just like, I think these medicines, with great power comes great responsibility. What I love about what you do is that, in my mind, the best outcome for me personally of connecting with the psychedelic medicine is creating awareness and removing that which is weighing me down. And so what I love about you is that for individuals that reach out to me and are like, hey, do you recommend I connect with cannabis? I have schizophrenia. I always say no. Like, I'm just like, no, you definitely shouldn't do that. I'm not an expert in that. I don't recommend it. But now I can send them to you and say, hey, I know what you're looking for. You're looking to have some of that weight taken off of you. You know, there's an avenue there with plant medicines, but it's also a very slippery slope. But what I love what you do is that it's a very safe route to go on where these individuals can still benefit from the positive side of psychedelics without having to necessarily risk entering a deeper state of psychosis, schizophrenia, more anxiety, etc. So that's really cool. And I'm curious for you, like, you know, have you had people come to you that also, I mean, I know Jason, for instance, but have you had people come to you that work with plant medicines as well? And, you know, maybe have had some success there? Like, you know, have you had any like kind of clients that have worked with plant medicines? And have you seen that the work you do with them is able to really move things that maybe even plant medicines are not able to illuminate for them or things like that?
I would say yes. You know, I've worked with quite a few people that are doing plant medicine because I'm in Ecuador right now, right? So there's a lot of shamans and stuff. And actually, one of the organization that does it invites me to come for their retreats and work on the people in between so that I can help them process whatever it is that came up. And it's very successful. And then the other thing I wanted to say is about psychotic episode. You know, like I actually have worked with people who had psychotic episodes in the past and help them get over that trauma, because oftentimes it's a PTSD thing. You know, like they were so stressed. That's why they had that psychotic episode to begin with. And so once they're not in it, I can definitely help them. And I've helped a number of people with that.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that it's a yes and, right? Like, you know, because for me, I always speak about the most important aspect of working with a plant medicine, or really any aspect of life for that matter, is the integration aspect, you know, and I say often that's where the real work begins, because when you get shown all these things, right, you go kind of behind the veil, it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes. It can be euphoric, it can be terrifying, it can be all these things. But when you come back to your reality, your default mode network, your ego, and all your programs and patterns come back on. It's kind of like the analogy I always give is, it's like if you have a virus on your computer, we'll use this analogy again, and you started in safe mode, right? So now you don't have to experience the virus because you're in safe mode. The example here is like you're on a psychedelic, you're past the ego and default mode network. You're therefore not experiencing what you're typically experiencing. But once you start the computer back up, if you haven't removed that virus, it just comes right back in, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I love being able to work with plant medicines and this modality, because you're right. Like the integration aspect is very challenging for a lot of people, because it's like, okay, cool, I know I need to integrate, but what does that look like? And it can look drastically different from person to person. I know some people that their integration is, you know, having time alone for a couple of weeks after a ceremony. I know other people who like to get right back into the gym, and their integration is just like, you know, really hitting the ground running, you know, eating healthy, things like that. And at the end of the day, like there is no right or wrong answer to this. And so what I love about what you're doing is that, you know, your modality works regardless. Like someone doesn't have to think about, what do I have to do to stabilize this? What do I have to do to make sure this doesn't go away? It just is able to stay. And I think that's beautiful, because, you know, at the end of the day, we're not just born here to be miserable. We're not born here to say, well, I guess that's the most I can get out of life. I guess that's the happiest I'm ever going to be. I choose to not believe that. Mm-hmm. You know, whenever someone has told me like, that's just the best you can get. I remember one time I went to a doctor and I was having a lot of neck tension in the front of my neck. And I remember I went in, and this was a nice doctor. I knew her. She was a nurse practitioner for my doctor at the time. And I walked in and I told her like, yeah, you know, I'm having this tension in my neck. I'm not really sure what it is. And she just looked right at me and she goes, yeah, well, you know, it's probably not going to get that much better. So we can talk about different things to maybe help it, but you're probably going to be with that for the rest of your life. And I was like, you didn't even have a hand on me. You didn't know what I'm going through. Like, and I personally believe that the physical body and its ailments are just manifestations of what's going on in the spiritual plane first, but then the mental and emotional planes too. And so to be able to like have someone like that who's been told that this is the best you can have, to be able to have an experience where now they're able to access more and have a more beautiful life. I mean, really, what is a better gift than that? That's why I'm so fired up about the gift you give to humanity and being able to support in that way. Because I really can't think of anything that is more important than being able to access joy, euphoria, fulfillment in life, etc. It's just really cool.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, before, like for many years, I worked one-on-one, and I kept thinking I really want to work one-on-many because I want to multiply this effect. Right. So I finally figured it out. That's how I'm doing these forgiveness calls on the Sundays. And sometimes I have up like 40 people on there. It's really great, so, and my goal is to have 500 people on these calls, because I can handle up to 500 on my Zoom. And imagine if we had 500 people meeting every Sunday, forgiving another person. I mean, the ripple effect that it does, because what I found is that so many of the people who attend these calls find that not only they become completely at peace with that person, they don't have any charge on it whatsoever. They can feel that in their mind, in their body, because it's a body-mind technique. It's not just willing yourself to forgive someone, because I'm sure you've all tried that and it doesn't work very well. Because even though you're wanting to forgive them, you can still feel that in your body, right? You can still feel that physiology of anger or hurt or sad or whatever it is. So when you go through that process that I lead on Sundays, you literally can feel it as it goes down. It goes down. So let's say you started at a 10, and then we do the first point and it goes down, and then you have the second point, it goes down until I do all the points, and then it's gone. You can't feel the stress of it anymore. And it's so powerful. And people tell me after that a lot of time the person that they forgave ends up texting them or emailing them or connecting with them in some way. And many people have been able to heal that relationship. Isn't that amazing? It's like they can feel it. But to me, the way I see forgiveness is it's for the person who forgives. Because when you can't forgive someone, it affects you. It affects your energy. So every time you think of that person, it brings you down. So why would you want to keep that, right? But most people don't have a clue how to get rid of that. Even going to confession, for most people, it doesn't do it, right? They still can't forgive. And so this is a method that I've put together to help people do that. And it really works, and it's very exciting.
Oh, that's so amazing. Yeah, like I've always heard that, forgiveness is a gift of the self, because to hold resentment for someone else or anger towards them is like taking poison and expecting it to hurt the other person. Exactly. That's why I really think that forgiveness is a gift that we get to give ourselves. And, when we can also contextualize, like think about what an amazing story that is too, to be able to, I've been cheated on before in relationships, things like that. But how would I be mad at them when in reality, first of all, we're all human beings, right? I know I didn't take it personally, but at the end of the day, if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't have met Rachel. So like, how would I not forgive them? Like, I realize that I've made mistakes in my life, right? I've realized in hindsight, like, oh, there might've been a better way to handle that. So first of all, like, who am I, the pot calling the kettle black if I don't forgive them? And then also, like, look at how amazing my life has become, right? So if I held disdain for them, I'm only hurting myself in the beautiful world I get to live in now. So I absolutely love the fact they're able to host these ceremonies and really bring people into that. And Teshna, this has been absolutely amazing. I can't wait to have you back on for round technically 4, because we've done 4, but round 3 because the other episode got lost somewhere. But we'll make sure to put the links in the bio again, guys. Make sure to check that out. But just so I can hear right from your mouth, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about your techniques? Where can they find the calendar of events, especially your 3-day trainings, your 1-day trainings, etc.? Where can I send people to get in touch with all your magic?
Okay, so they can go on my website, which is drteshna.com, just drteshna.com. And on there, you go to workshops, and then you go on schedule, and then you'll see all the different events that I have.
I love that.
Right there. Yeah, and you can sign up for free for the forgiveness calls every Sunday, and also the 1-day MTT immersion as well. And then also the 3-day training, which there's a fee for that. And I also have a membership, where this has been really fun, because I only did the 3-day training before. And so many of my students are like, we want more, right? I'm like, okay, what do you want? They wanted, to be able to meet with me once a week, and get coached and for me to lead sessions as a group and everything. So I started a membership, and it's really amazing. People are really loving it. It's basically an all access membership. So that means they can take all my trainings for the year. They can get the recorded modules of the 3-day training. So because I only teach it 4 times a year, I'm retired technically. So I don't want to work that hard.
I don't blame you.
I got rid of that savior mentality, right? Where I have to work 24/7. So I only teach that 3-day training 4 times a year. But if you are a member, you can take it all 4 times. And then I also teach the 1-day every couple months or so. And then I do the 1-hour forgiveness call every Sunday, other than when I have the 3-day training, which is 4 times a year. But the rest of the time, that's my contribution to the world, and to let people know about this technique, because it's like, otherwise, it's like the best kept secret.
Yeah, we got to get this secret out to as many people as possible.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Of course. Teshna, this has been amazing. As always, thank you so much for sharing your magic, your gifts, your experience, your wisdom with us. And for everyone at home, I know you guys are going to be fired up about this. You guys loved Teshna's first episode a couple of weeks ago. Make sure, if you guys haven't given her a follow yet, if you haven't checked out her events, make sure you do that. I promise you guys, when I say I've worked with a lot of different people and they've all been amazing, but Teshna's technique is truly simplicity at its finest, and it really works. So make sure you give yourself the gift of being able to take the weight off that you've been carrying so that you can light up the world, so that you can teach it to your friends, your family, your loved ones, the people that mean so much to you. And as always, guys, I hope you are having the best day ever. If you loved the show, go give us a 5-star review. And until next time, may the force be with you to infinity and beyond, everybody. Much love.